The rain fell in heavy sheets across the empty bus stop. The evening sky had turned dark hours ago, and the last bits of daylight had disappeared behind the clouds. Most people had already gone home, but one person remained. A young woman sat in her wheelchair, her clothes soaked through as she tried to shield herself from the downpour with just a thin jacket pulled over her head. The last bus of the night pulled away from the curb, its red taillights fading into the distance. The woman lowered her head and wiped away tears that mixed with raindrops on her face. At the same moment, just across the street, David pulled his car into a parking spot. He was exhausted after finishing his 12-hour nursing shift at the local hospital. All he wanted was to pick up dinner from his favorite takeout place and go home to his daughter. But something made him pause as he stepped out of his car. Through the rain, he noticed the lone figure at the bus stop. David stood under his umbrella, watching for a minute. When no one came to help her and the woman made no move to leave, he felt a tug in his chest. He crossed the street, splashing through puddles. "Excuse me," he called out as he approached. "Are you okay? The last bus just left." The young woman looked up, her face pale with cold and worry. "I know," she said quietly. "My ride." They never showed up. David moved closer, holding his umbrella over her. "You're soaked through. How long have you been waiting here?" "A few hours," she admitted. She was shivering now. "I'll be fine." But David could see she wasn't fine. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wheels of her chair. Her thin jacket offered almost no protection from the weather. As a nurse, he recognized the signs of someone who needed help. "I'm David," he said. "I work at Memorial Hospital. Is there someone I can call for you? Or somewhere I can take you?" The woman hesitated before answering. "I'm Rose," she finally said. "The shelter I've been staying at. It's full tonight. They told me to try again tomorrow." She looked down at her lap, embarrassed. "I was supposed to meet someone who had a place, but they never came." David felt his heart sink. In their small town, options were limited, especially at this hour. "What about family?" he asked gently. Rose shook her head. "No one close by. I've been on my own since the accident." She gestured to her legs. "Lost my apartment after the medical bills piled up. Been trying to get back on my feet." She stopped and gave a small, sad laugh at her choice of words. Figure of speech, I guess. David thought of his own struggles after his wife had died 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. He knew what it was like to feel the world had turned its back on you. The rain was coming down harder now. In the distance, thunder rumbled. "Look," David said, making up his mind. "I have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's dry and warm. You could stay tonight and tomorrow we can figure something out." Rose stared at him, suspicious. "You don't know me." "I know you shouldn't be out here all night in this weather," David replied. "And I know what it's like to need help. I'm a single dad. I have a 10-year-old daughter at home with our neighbor right now. I can show you my hospital ID if that helps." He pulled out his wallet and showed her his badge. Rose studied it, then looked back up at his face as if trying to read his intentions. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. David shrugged. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it. Pay it forward, I guess." He paused. "No pressure. I can also drive you somewhere else if you'd prefer." Rose looked around at the empty street, the pouring rain, and the darkened shop fronts. Her options were few. After a long moment, she nodded. "Just for tonight," she said firmly. David smiled. "Just for tonight," he agreed. Getting Rose into his car took some effort. David helped her transfer from her wheelchair to the passenger seat, then folded the chair and placed it in the trunk. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, the silence between them was awkward but not unfriendly. "So you're a nurse?" Rose asked eventually. David nodded. "For 12 years now. Emergency department. That must be hard work." "It is," David admitted. "But it's good work, meaningful." He glanced at her.
"What about you?"
"What did you do before?" "I taught art at the elementary school," Rose said, a hint of pride in her voice. "I loved it. The kids, their creativity. It was the best job." Her voice trailed off. "That was 8 months ago before the car accident." David could hear the loss in her voice. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Rose looked out the window. "Me too." They turned onto a quiet street lined with modest homes. David pulled into the driveway of a small one-story house with a ramp leading up to the front door. "You have a ramp," Rose noted, surprised. David nodded as he turned off the engine. "My mother-in-law used to visit a lot before she moved to Florida." She used a walker. He didn't mention that after his wife died, his mother-in-law had found it too painful to visit the house where her daughter had lived. "Wait here," David said. "I'll get your chair ready." As he stepped out into the rain, David felt a moment of doubt. What was he doing, bringing a complete stranger home? But something about Rose's situation had touched him. Sometimes life knocked you down and you needed someone to offer a hand. The front door opened before David could reach it. His daughter stood in the doorway, her curious face illuminated by the porch light. Behind her stood Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched her after school. "Dad," the girl called out. "You're super late." "We already ate the leftovers." "Sorry, Zoe," David called back. "Something came up. I brought someone who needs our help tonight." Zoe's eyes widened as she watched her father open the passenger door and help Rose into her wheelchair. Mrs. Chen appeared beside Zoe, her expression concerned. "David, who is this?" "Her name is Rose," David explained as he wheeled Rose toward the house. "She was stranded at the bus stop in this storm. She needs a place to stay tonight." Mrs. Chen gave him a look that clearly said she thought he'd lost his mind, but she didn't say anything in front of Rose. Instead, she patted Zoe on the shoulder. "I should go home now. Call me if you need anything." As Mrs. Chen hurried to her house next door, David helped Rose up the ramp. Zoe stood in the doorway watching with wide eyes. "Zoe, this is Rose," David said as they entered the house. "Rose, this is my daughter Zoe." "Hi," Rose said, her voice soft. She was clearly uncomfortable, water dripping from her clothes onto the welcome mat. "I'm sorry to intrude on your home." Zoe didn't answer, just stared at Rose's wheelchair and wet clothes. "Zoe," David prompted gently. "Where are your manners?" "Hi," Zoe finally said. "Why are you all wet?" "I got caught in the rain," Rose explained. "Your dad was kind enough to help me." David moved around them, turning on lights and grabbing towels from the hall closet. "Rose is going to stay in the spare room tonight," he told Zoe as he handed Rose a towel. She needed a place to go. "Are you homeless?" Zoe asked bluntly. "Zoe!" David exclaimed, embarrassed. But Rose just gave a small smile. "It's okay," she said to David, then to Zoe. "Sort of. I've had some bad luck recently." Zoe seemed to accept this answer. "Dad says bad luck doesn't last forever," she said. "That's what he told me when Mom died." The simple statement hung in the air. Rose looked at David with new understanding in her eyes. "Your dad sounds very wise," she said quietly. David cleared his throat, emotion threatening to overcome him for a moment. "Let's get you some dry clothes," he said to Rose, "and I'll make us all some hot chocolate." As he moved around the kitchen, heating milk and finding the cocoa mix, David watched Zoe cautiously show Rose their small living room. Despite her initial hesitation, his daughter was now pointing out her favorite books and toys to their unexpected guest. Rose listened attentively, her wet hair beginning to dry in the warmth of the house. For just a brief moment, when she laughed at something Zoe said, David caught a glimpse of the person she might have been before life had dealt her such a difficult hand. In that moment, he knew he'd made the right choice at the bus stop. "Come with me," he had said. 3 simple words that might just change everything. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the small house, something new and fragile had begun. None of them knew where it would lead, but for tonight at least they were all safe, warm, and a little less alone in the world. Morning light filtered through the curtains of the spare bedroom where Rose had spent the night. She opened her eyes slowly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. The walls were a pale blue, decorated with a few watercolor landscapes. A small desk sat in the corner and a bookshelf filled with medical textbooks and novels lined one wall. It all came rushing back. The bus stop, the rain, the kind stranger named David who had brought her home. Rose pushed herself up to sitting position, her useless legs stretched out in front of her. Her wheelchair stood nearby, within arm's reach as David had positioned it the night before. The house was quiet except for some muffled sounds coming from the kitchen. Rose glanced at the small digital clock on the bedside table. 7:15 a.m. She had slept later than she intended. Embarrassment washed over her. She had planned to be gone before they woke up to avoid imposing any further. With practiced movements, Rose transferred herself from the bed to her wheelchair. She was wearing borrowed clothes, a soft gray t-shirt and sweatpants that David had given her the night before, saying they had belonged to his late wife but had never been worn. The clothes were slightly big on her thin frame, but they were clean and comfortable. Rose wheeled herself to the small adjoining bathroom to freshen up. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her long brown hair was a tangled mess. She splashed water on her face and used a spare toothbrush David had provided. There wasn't much she could do about her appearance, but at least she felt somewhat human again. When she finally worked up the courage to leave the room, the smell of coffee and toast guided her down the hallway. The house wasn't fully accessible. The doorways were just wide enough for her chair, but there were a few places where she had to maneuver carefully. In the kitchen, she found David at the stove, flipping pancakes. He was already dressed for the day in dark blue scrubs, his hair still damp from a shower. Zoe sat at the table, a half-eaten pancake on her plate, backpack ready beside her chair. "Good morning," Rose said, her voice coming out more timidly than she intended. David turned with a smile. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Rose admitted. "Thank you." Zoe stared at Rose with the unfiltered curiosity of a child. "Do you want pancakes? Dad makes them shaped like animals, but they mostly look like blobs." David laughed. "Art was never my strong suit," he said, sliding what was supposed to be a pancake rabbit onto a plate. "Coffee?" "Please," Rose said, wheeling herself to the table. She noticed that David had moved one of the chairs away to make room for her wheelchair. The thoughtful gesture touched her. "I can't thank you enough for last night," Rose said as David placed a mug of coffee and the plate of pancakes in front of her. "But I should get going soon. I've already imposed enough." David sat down with his own coffee. "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air. Rose stared into her coffee cup, avoiding his gaze. "The shelter might have space today," she said finally. "Or there's a women's center downtown that sometimes has day facilities. You can stay here another night if you need to," David said. "It's no trouble." Rose shook her head firmly. "I can't keep accepting charity. I need to figure things out on my own." "It's not charity," David corrected gently. "It's help. There's a difference." "Dad, we're going to be late," Zoe interrupted, looking at the clock on the wall. "Ms. Patterson hates when people come in after the bell." David checked his watch and stood up quickly. "You're right, kiddo. Let me grab my keys." He looked at Rose. "I have to drop Zoe at school and then head to work. My shift ends at 4 today. The house key is on the counter if you need to go out. But you're welcome to stay here today. Think about what I said about tonight." Before Rose could argue, they were rushing out the door, leaving her alone in the quiet house. She sat for a long moment, listening to the unfamiliar sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a clock somewhere, the distant sound of a neighbor mowing their lawn. It felt strange to be in someone else's home, surrounded by their lives. Photos hung on the walls. David and a pretty woman with Zoe as a toddler between them. Zoe missing front teeth in a school picture. A family gathering with grandparents and cousins. A life that had been built over years. Rose's own life had been dismantled so quickly. One moment she was a healthy 28-year-old art teacher with an apartment and plans for the future. The next, she was waking up in a hospital bed, unable to feel her legs, being told she would never walk again. The drunk driver who hit her car had walked away with a few scratches. She had lost everything: her mobility, her job when the school couldn't accommodate her new needs, and eventually her apartment when the medical bills piled up and her insurance fell short. With a sigh, Rose wheeled herself around the house, taking it in properly now that she was alone. It was small but neat, with furniture that showed signs of wear but was well cared for. Zoe's artwork covered the refrigerator, stick figures and rainbow landscapes and what might have been a cat, or possibly a very strange horse. In the living room, Rose found a desk with paperwork spread across it. Bills, insurance forms, and what looked like an application for financial assistance for medical expenses. David was clearly struggling too, just in different ways. The bathroom down the hall was obviously Zoe's domain. Bright pink towels and a step stool by the sink. Rose noticed small touches that spoke of David's attempts to create a normal life for his daughter. A framed picture of the two of them at what looked like a father-daughter dance. Zoe in a sparkly dress and David in a tie. A chore chart with gold stars. A hand-drawn girls' rule sign taped to the mirror. As Rose made her way back to the kitchen, she noticed a door that was partially open. Curious, she pushed it wider and found herself looking into what must be David's bedroom. Unlike the rest of the house, which was tidy if lived in, his room showed the chaos of someone who didn't have time to care for his own space. The bed was unmade, clothes were draped over a chair, and prescription bottles clustered on the nightstand. Rose quickly backed away, feeling like an intruder. But what she had seen gave her a glimpse into David's life, a man who put his daughter's needs ahead of his own, who kept up appearances in the common areas, but had no energy left for his private space. She recognized the signs of someone just barely holding it together. Back in the kitchen, Rose stared at the dirty breakfast dishes in the sink. Without thinking too much about it, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. It wasn't easy from her wheelchair, but she managed to reach the sink and wash everything, then dry and put away what she could reach. Next, she wiped down the counters and table. Once the kitchen was clean, Rose felt restless. She wheeled herself back to the spare room and found her clothes from yesterday now dry after David had hung them up last night. She changed, folded the borrowed clothes neatly on the bed, and then faced a decision. She could leave now, try to find a place at the shelter or the women's center. That had been her plan, but something kept her from going. Maybe it was the memory of Zoe's curious open face at breakfast, or maybe it was the barely hidden exhaustion she'd seen in David's eyes, or perhaps it was just the simple comfort of being in a real home after months of institutional living. Rose made her way to the living room and spotted a sketch pad and colored pencils on a shelf, probably Zoe's art supplies. Her fingers itched to hold the pencil again, to lose herself in creation for just a little while. After a moment's hesitation, she took them and began to draw. Hours passed as Rose sketched. First, she drew the view from the window, the small front yard with its maple tree and the street beyond. Then she drew from memory her old classroom, her students, the life she'd lost. When those images became too painful, she switched to drawing the inside of David's house, the cozy kitchen, Zoe's artwork, the family photos. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the front door open. It wasn't until a small voice said, "Wow, that's really good," that Rose realized she wasn't alone. Startled, she looked up to see Zoe standing beside her, peering at the drawing. "I didn't hear you come in. School got out early today." "Teacher meetings," Zoe explained. "Mrs. Chen brought me home." She pointed at the sketch pad. "You draw way better than my dad." "Are you an artist?" "I used to be an art teacher," Rose said, feeling a twinge of sadness at the past tense. Zoe's eyes widened. "Really, at a real school?" Rose nodded. "For 5 years. Can you teach me to draw like that?" Zoe asked, her voice eager. Before Rose could answer, the sound of another car pulling into the driveway caught their attention. Through the window, they could see David getting out, still in his scrubs, looking tired but relieved to be home. "Dad's home early too," Zoe said. "He said if he finished his charts fast, he could leave at 3 today." David came through the door a moment later, his face registering surprise and then pleasure when he saw Rose still there. "You stayed," he said simply. Rose nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. I hope that's still okay." "More than okay," David assured her. He noticed the sketch pad in her lap. "You draw?" "Rose was an art teacher, Dad," Zoe announced excitedly. "A real one! And she's going to teach me how to draw better than you." David laughed. "That's a pretty low bar to clear," he joked. Then to Rose, "I didn't know you were an artist." "There's a lot we don't know about each other," Rose pointed out. "We only met yesterday." David nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Well, I'd like to learn more if you're willing to share." He glanced at his watch. "How about over dinner?" "I was thinking of ordering pizza." "Pizza?" Zoe cheered, the universal child's approval of this plan evident. Rose hesitated, then smiled. "I'd like that," she said, "but only if you let me contribute somehow. I can't keep taking without giving anything back." David seemed about to protest, then thought better of it. "How about you help Zoe with her art homework while I shower and change? She has to create a family portrait for class, and as you can tell from the pancakes this morning, artistic talent skipped my generation." "I'd be happy to," Rose agreed, feeling a small but genuine spark of joy at the thought of teaching again, even in this small way. As David disappeared down the hall and Zoe eagerly pulled out her school assignment, Rose felt something shift inside her. For months, she had been focused on survival, on getting through each day. But here in this modest house with these two strangers who were quickly becoming something more, she felt a different emotion taking root. Hope. small and fragile but undeniably there. The pizza arrived an hour later, and as they sat around the table sharing food and stories, Rose realized she was laughing, actually laughing for the first time since the accident. Zoe was describing a classroom disaster involving a science experiment, a frog and the principal's toupee, and both adults were wiping away tears of mirth. Later, as the evening wound down and Zoe reluctantly headed to bed after extracting promises of more art lessons from Rose, David and Rose found themselves alone in the living room. A comfortable silence stretched between them. "Thank you," Rose said finally. "Not just for the place to stay, but for making me feel like a person again. Not just a problem to be solved or a case to be managed." David's eyes were kind as he looked at her. "Everyone needs help sometimes," he said. "Even me. Especially me." In that moment, with the soft lamplight casting shadows around them and the remnants of an evening filled with laughter still hanging in the air, Rose made a decision. Maybe just for a little while she could let herself be helped. Maybe healing could begin here in this unexpected place. "I think I'll take you up on that offer to stay another night," she said, "if it's still open." David's smile was all the answer she needed. Days turned into a week, and a week somehow stretched into 2. What had started as an emergency overnight stay had gradually transformed into something neither Rose nor David could have anticipated. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Rose expertly flipped pancakes on the stove. Unlike David's misshapen attempts, hers actually resembled the animals they were supposed to be. From her wheelchair, she had mastered the layout of the kitchen, finding ways to reach what she needed and adapt to the space that wasn't designed for someone in her situation. "That one really looks like an elephant," Zoe exclaimed, watching from her seat at the table. She was already dressed for school, her backpack packed and waiting by the door. Rose smiled as she transferred the pancake to Zoe's plate. "Art is all about seeing shapes in things. An elephant is just circles and lines put together in the right way. Can we have more art class after school today?" Zoe asked, drowning her elephant in maple syrup. "If your homework is done first," Rose replied, falling easily into a routine that had developed over the past 2 weeks. David entered the kitchen, dressed in his scrubs and looking more rested than he had in months. "Something smells amazing," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot Rose had already brewed. "Rose made elephant pancakes," Zoe informed him through a mouthful. "Yours always look like blobs." David laughed, catching Rose's eye with a look of mock offense. "I've been betrayed in my own home." The easy banter between them had become natural, a comfortable rhythm to their mornings. But beneath the surface, Rose felt a nagging worry. This couldn't last forever. She knew it, and she suspected David did too. As if reading her thoughts, David placed an envelope on the counter beside her. "This came yesterday," he said. "From the social services office." Rose stared at the envelope, her stomach tightening. She'd been working with a case manager to find housing and apply for benefits since the accident had left her unable to work. The process had been frustratingly slow, full of paperwork and delays. "I'll look at it later," she said, turning her attention back to the stove. David nodded, not pressing the issue. "I've got a double shift today," he told her. "I won't be home until late tonight. Mrs. Chen said she'll bring Zoe home after school, but she has a doctor's appointment at 4. "I'll be here," Rose assured him. It had become their unspoken arrangement. Rose staying with Zoe when David worked late, helping with homework, making dinner, providing the kind of stability that had been missing in the small family's life. After David and Zoe left for the day, Rose finally opened the envelope. Inside was a letter informing her that her application for subsidized accessible housing had been approved. A small apartment in a building across town would be available in 2 weeks. The rent would be based on her disability benefits, which had also finally been approved. Rose should have felt relieved. This was what she'd been waiting for, a chance to regain her independence, to stop relying on David's generosity. Instead, she felt a hollow sensation in her chest. The thought of leaving this house with its narrow doorways and imperfect accessibility but so much warmth filled her with a sadness she hadn't expected. She folded the letter and put it away. She would tell David tonight, she decided. For now, she had other things to focus on. Rose had started helping David organize his chaotic paperwork, using her days alone in the house to bring some order to his life. Bills were now paid on time, insurance claims properly filed, and she'd even discovered he was eligible for a childcare tax credit he hadn't known about. Today, she was tackling the spare room that had become hers, cleaning and organizing the space that had been used for storage before her arrival. As she sorted through boxes, she came across photo albums and mementos from David's life before she knew him. Wedding photos showed a younger, carefree David with his wife, a pretty woman with Zoe's same bright eyes and smile. There were baby pictures of Zoe, family vacations, and then abruptly the photos changed. Hospital pictures. David's wife in a bed, looking thin and pale but still smiling. Zoe, maybe 5 or 6 years old, curled up beside her mother. Then nothing. No more photos of the woman who had once been the center of this family. Rose closed the album, feeling like an intruder in someone else's grief. She understood now why David had been so quick to help her that rainy night. He knew what it was like to have life change in an instant, to lose everything you thought was certain. Later that afternoon, Zoe burst into the house, full of energy and stories from her day. Mrs. Chen waved from the driveway before heading to her appointment, and Rose found herself alone with the girl who had somehow worked her way into her heart over the past 2 weeks. "Can we do art now?" Zoe asked, barely taking time to drop her backpack. "Homework first," Rose reminded her. "Then art." Zoe groaned but complied, pulling out her math worksheet. As Rose helped her work through the problems, she was struck by how natural this felt, how quickly they had fallen into a routine together. "Rose," Zoe said as they finished the last problem, "are you going to stay with us forever?" The question caught Rose off guard. No, Zoe. This was always temporary. Just until I could find my own place." Zoe's face fell. "But you make Dad happy." He smiles more now. Rose felt a lump form in her throat. "Your dad was kind enough to help me when I needed it. But I can't stay forever. Why not?" Zoe's question was so simple, so direct in the way that only children can be. Before Rose could answer, the phone rang. She wheeled herself to the kitchen to answer it. "Hello? Rose, it's David." His voice sounded tense. "Is everything okay?" she asked, instantly alert. "There's been a multi-car accident on the highway. They're bringing in a lot of patients and they've called in everyone available. I'll be here all night." "Don't worry about Zoe," Rose assured him. "We're fine here." "Thanks," David said, relief evident in his voice. "I don't know what I'd do without you these days." After they hung up, Rose relayed the message to Zoe, who seemed unfazed by the news of her father working late. It had happened often enough before. They spent the evening working on an art project together, a detailed drawing of the tree in the front yard, with the house in the background. Rose guided Zoe's hand, teaching her about perspective and shading. The hours passed quickly, and soon it was time for Zoe's bath and bedtime. As Rose tucked her in, Zoe asked sleepily, "Will you read me a story?" Rose reached for the book on the nightstand, a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web that they had been reading together. She began where they had left off the night before, the story of unlikely friendship and finding family in unexpected places resonating deeply with her. Halfway through the chapter, Zoe was asleep. Rose marked their place and set the book aside, watching the gentle rise and fall of the little girl's chest. She felt a fierce surge of protectiveness, an emotion she hadn't expected to feel for someone else's child. Back in the living room, Rose worked on her own art, a series of sketches she had been creating of David and Zoe, capturing moments of their life together. Drawing had always been her escape, her way of processing the world, and these past 2 weeks had given her back that part of herself. It was past midnight when she heard a key in the lock. David entered, looking exhausted, still in his scrubs. "You're still up," he said, surprised. "I wanted to make sure you got home okay," Rose replied. "How was it?" David sank onto the couch beside her wheelchair. "Rough. We lost 2 people. The others will make it, but—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. Without thinking, Rose reached out and took his hand. "I'm sorry." David looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. "Thank you for being here," he said quietly. "For Zoe. For me." Rose knew this was the moment to tell him about the letter, about the apartment waiting for her. Instead, she squeezed his hand. "You should get some rest." David nodded, too tired to argue. As he stood to go, his gaze fell on the sketchbook in Rose's lap. "May I?" he asked hesitantly. Rose handed it to him. David flipped through the pages. his expression softening as he took in the drawings of why. Myself and Zoe laughing at the breakfast table, David asleep on the couch with a book on his chest, the two of them playing a board game on the living room floor. "These are beautiful," he said. "You've captured her perfectly." He paused on a sketch of himself, his face in profile as he looked out the window. "Is this really how you see me?" Rose nodded. "An artist draws what they see." David handed the sketchbook back, his fingers lingering as they brushed against hers. "You have an amazing gift. Have you thought about teaching again?" The question caught her off guard. "The school district couldn't accommodate me after the accident. The old building wasn't accessible and they didn't have funding for the changes needed." "There are other schools," David suggested, "or private lessons." "You're incredible with Zoe." For the first time in months, Rose allowed herself to consider possibilities beyond basic survival. "Maybe," she said. "When I'm more settled." David seemed about to say something else but was interrupted by a yawn he couldn't suppress. "I should sleep," he admitted. "Good night, Rose." "Good night, David." The next morning brought chaos. David overslept. Zoe couldn't find her homework folder, and in the rush, Rose's presence seemed to be the only thing holding the household together. She found the missing folder under the couch, made quick sandwiches for lunches, and somehow got everyone out the door only 5 minutes behind schedule. As the house fell silent, Rose felt a strange mixture of pride and belonging. She had become essential to this small family in ways she hadn't anticipated. The letter about her new apartment lay hidden in her drawer, still unmentioned. The phone rang again mid-morning. Rose answered, expecting a telemarketer or perhaps David calling from work. "Hello, may I speak with Rose Miller?" An unfamiliar female voice asked. "This is Rose." "Rose, this is Brenda Williams from Social Services. I'm calling to confirm that you received our letter about the housing assignment." "Yes, I did," Rose replied, her stomach tightening. "Thank you. Excellent. I also wanted to let you know that we have a job opportunity that might interest you. The community center is looking for an art instructor for their after-school program. It's part-time and the building is fully accessible. Given your background, I thought of you immediately." Rose's heart raced. A chance to teach again, to be independent, to rebuild her life. "That sounds wonderful," she managed to say. "Great. I've scheduled an interview for you tomorrow at 10. The address is in your housing packet. Oh, and our records show you're currently staying with—" There was a rustling of papers. "David Turner? Is that correct?" "Yes," Rose confirmed. "And what is your relationship to Mr. Turner?" The question was professional but pointed. Rose hesitated. What was her relationship to David? Roommate? Friend? Something more complicated that had no easy label. "He's a friend who offered temporary housing while I waited for my benefits and housing to be approved," she said finally. "I see. Well, I'll need to do a home visit before your move to the new apartment. How about this afternoon at 4? I can meet you at Mr. Turner's address." Before Rose could object, the social worker had confirmed the appointment and ended the call. Rose sat motionless, staring at the phone. A home visit? Questions about her relationship with David? The job interview? Everything was happening so fast, bringing her temporary arrangement with David to its inevitable conclusion. The day passed in a blur as Rose prepared for the social worker's visit. She cleaned the already tidy house, organized her belongings, and tried to create some mental distance between herself and this place that had begun to feel like home. At 3:30, Zoe arrived home from school, bubbling with excitement about a science project. "We get to make volcanoes," she announced as she burst through the door. "And I told Ms. Patterson that you could help me because you're an artist and you know how to make things look real." Rose smiled despite her anxiety. "That sounds fun. But listen, Zoe, someone is coming to visit me today. A social worker from the agency that's helping me find my own place." Zoe's excitement dimmed. "You're still leaving?" "I have to, sweetheart. This was never meant to be permanent." Before Zoe could argue further, the doorbell rang. Rose took a deep breath and went to answer it, finding a professional-looking woman in her 40s standing on the porch. "Rose Miller. I'm Brenda Williams," the woman introduced herself. "Thank you for accommodating this visit on such short notice." As Brenda stepped inside, her gaze swept the house, taking in the modest furnishings. The ramp at the front door and Zoe watching curiously from the hallway. "And you must be Mr. Turner's daughter," Brenda said with a smile. "I'm Zoe," the girl replied. "Are you going to make Rose leave us?" Brenda's eyebrows rose. No one is making anyone do anything, Zoe. I'm just here to help Rose with her transition to independent living. The next hour was uncomfortable as Brenda asked questions about Rose's daily routine, her medical needs, and her future plans. The social worker was kind but thorough, making notes in her file as they talked. And how did you come to stay with Mr. Turner? She asked finally. Our records show you were previously at the women's shelter downtown. Rose explained about the rainy night, the missed bus, David's offer of help. As she spoke, she realized how unlikely it all sounded. A single father taking in a paralyzed homeless woman he'd met at a bus stop. It was just supposed to be for one night, she finished. But then she became part of our family, Zoe interrupted from the doorway where she had been listening. And now you want to take her away? Zoe, Rose began, embarrassed by the child's outburst. But Brenda held up a hand. It's okay. Zoe, can I ask you something? Has having Rose here been good for you and your dad? Zoe nodded emphatically. Dad smiles more. And I'm learning to draw real things, not just stick figures. And Rose makes sure we eat vegetables, not just pizza all the time. Brenda smiled at that, making another note in her file. Rose, may I speak with Mr. Turner as well? Is he home? He's at work, Rose explained. He's a nurse at Memorial Hospital. I see. Brenda closed her file. Well, I think I have everything I need for now. The apartment will be ready in 2 weeks, as the letter stated. And don't forget your job interview tomorrow. As Rose showed Brenda out, the social worker paused at the door. Rose, I want to be clear about something. Our goal is to help you achieve independence and stability. But independence doesn't mean being alone. Whatever arrangement works best for your well-being is what we support. With those cryptic words, she left, leaving Rose to wonder what exactly she had seen during her visit. That evening, as Rose helped Zoe with her homework, her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the job interview, the new apartment, and the strange sense of loss she felt at the thought of leaving this place. When David came home, his face lit up at the sight of them at the kitchen table. How are my two favorite people today? He asked, dropping his keys on the counter. Rose has to go to a meeting tomorrow, Zoe informed him, about a job teaching art. David looked at Rose, surprise and pleasure on his face. Really? That's wonderful. Rose nodded, finally finding the courage to tell him everything. And I got the letter about the apartment. It will be ready in 2 weeks. David's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. That's great news. You must be excited to have your own space again. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Zoe looked from one adult to the other, sensing the tension. I don't want Rose to go, she announced. Why can't she just live here with us forever? David and Rose exchanged a look, neither knowing how to answer. In that moment, Rose realized that the solution might be both simpler and more complicated than she had imagined. The question wasn't just about where she would live, but about what they were becoming to each other. This unlikely family brought together, by chance and rain and an act of kindness that had changed everything. The community center bustled with afternoon activity as Rose wheeled herself down the hallway toward her new classroom. It had been 3 weeks since her interview, and the job as an art instructor had started immediately, even before she moved into her new apartment. The director had been impressed with her portfolio and teaching experience, and the center's recent renovations made it fully accessible. Rose arranged supplies on the tables, colored pencils, watercolors, and sketching paper. Her first class would begin in 30 minutes, a group of elementary school children in an after-school program. Nervous excitement fluttered in her stomach. It felt like the first day of school all over again, that blend of anticipation and worry that came with new beginnings. As she worked, her mind drifted to David and Zoe. She still stayed at their house, though her apartment was ready and waiting. Somehow, neither of them had pushed the issue of her moving out, creating an unspoken agreement to delay the inevitable. But Rose knew it couldn't last. The social worker's follow-up visit was scheduled for tomorrow, and questions would be asked about why she hadn't moved to her assigned housing. Ms. Miller? A woman appeared in the doorway holding a clipboard. I'm Penny, the program coordinator. Just wanted to check if you have everything you need for your first class. Rose smiled. Yes, I think so. A bit nervous, but in a good way. You'll be wonderful, Penny assured her. The kids are excited to have a real artist teaching them. Oh, and there's someone here to see you. Should I send her? Rose looked up, surprised. Her? Penny stepped aside, revealing Brenda Williams, the social worker, standing in the hallway. Sorry to drop by unannounced, Brenda said, entering the classroom as Penny disappeared down the hall. I was in the building for another case and thought I'd see how you're settling in. It's fine, Rose said, though her pulse quickened. I'm just preparing for my first class. Brenda nodded, looking around the bright room with its wide doorways and lowered tables that accommodated Rose's wheelchair. This seems perfect for you. How does it feel to be teaching again? I haven't started yet, but it feels right, Rose admitted. Like I'm getting a piece of myself back. Brenda leaned against one of the tables. That's what we want to hear. And how are things at the Turner household? The direct question caught Rose off guard. Fine, good. Zoe is doing well in school and David's work schedule has been more regular lately. I notice you didn't mention the apartment, Brenda observed. According to my records, you should have moved in last week. Rose busied herself with arranging paintbrushes. I've been meaning to. It's just been so busy with starting this job and David's schedule and helping Zoe with her school project. Rose, Brenda interrupted gently. I need to be direct here. Your living arrangement with Mr. Turner was presented to us as temporary emergency housing, but it's been over a month now. And despite having an apartment available, you haven't moved. I know it looks complicated, Rose said. It does, Brenda agreed. And that puts me in a difficult position. The subsidized housing program has a waiting list. If you don't need the apartment, there are others who do. Rose felt heat rise to her face. Of course I need it. I'll move this weekend. I just needed a little more time. Brenda studied her face carefully. Rose, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen all kinds of situations, all kinds of relationships. Whatever is happening between you and David Turner is your business. But I need to make sure everyone is safe and proper procedures are followed. Nothing is happening between us. Rose protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Nothing had happened in the physical sense, but something had been growing between them. An understanding, a connection, a shared life that had developed so gradually she hadn't noticed until it was already deeply rooted. Here's what concerns me, Brenda continued. Mr. Turner is a single father with a young daughter. You are a vulnerable client receiving social services. If there is a personal relationship developing, I need to know that it's healthy and appropriate for everyone involved, especially the child. Rose felt defensive anger rise in her chest. Are you suggesting that I would do something to harm Zoe, or that David would take advantage of me? You don't know either of us, Brenda held up a hand. I'm not suggesting anything of the sort, but it's my job to ask these questions. Her expression softened. Look, Rose, off the record, I think you found something special with that family. Zoe adores you, that was clear from our first meeting. And the way you talk about them, it's obvious you care deeply. Rose didn't know how to respond. Hearing someone else articulate what she had been feeling made it suddenly, undeniably real. I'll move to the apartment, she said finally. This weekend. You're right. Other people need it more than I do, Brenda nodded. I'll make a note in your file, and Rose, whatever you decide about your living situation long term, just make sure it's what's best for you, not what you think should happen or what others expect, what you actually want. With that, she left, leaving Rose to ponder her words as children began filtering into the classroom for her first art lesson. Teaching turned out to be exactly what Rose needed. For 2 hours, she lost herself in showing eager young artists how to mix colors and create perspective. Their excitement and creativity reminded her of why she had become a teacher in the first place. To share the joy of creation, to watch someone discover their own abilities. By the time the class ended and parents arrived to collect their children, Rose felt energized despite her nerves. Several parents stopped to compliment her on the artwork their children proudly displayed, and the community center director poked his head in to say he'd heard only good things. As the last child left, Rose began cleaning up, a satisfying fatigue settling over her. She had done it, taught her first class since the accident. It was a small step, but a significant one. Looks like it was a success, a familiar voice said from the doorway. Rose looked up to see David standing there, still in his hospital scrubs, a proud smile on his face. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised and pleased. I thought you were working until 6. Swapped shifts with another nurse, he explained. entering the room and taking in the colorful evidence of the art lesson. I wanted to be here for your first day. Zoe's at her friend Maddie's house for dinner, so I thought maybe we could celebrate. Dinner out, just the two of us, just the two of us. The phrase hung in the air, carrying more weight than it might have a few weeks ago. That would be nice, Rose said, feeling suddenly shy. But I'm a mess. She gestured to her paint-stained shirt. You look perfect, David said, then quickly added, but we can stop at home if you want to change first. Home. The word slipped out so naturally, yet it highlighted the very issue Rose had been avoiding. Where was home now? The house she shared with David and Zoe? Or the empty apartment waiting for her? David, we need to talk, she said as they left the community center and headed to his car. Brenda Williams came by today, the social worker. She wants to know why I haven't moved to the apartment yet. David helped her into the passenger seat and stowed her wheelchair in the trunk, a routine they had perfected over the weeks. As he slid into the driver's seat, his expression was hard to read. What did you tell her? He asked, starting the car. That I'd move this weekend, Rose replied. And I should. It doesn't make sense to keep an empty apartment while others need it. David was quiet as they drove, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Finally, at a red light, he turned to look at her. Is that what you want? To move out? The direct question caught Rose off guard. It's not about what I want. It's about what makes sense. I can't keep imposing on you and Zoe forever. Imposing? David shook his head. Rose, do you have any idea how much better our lives have been since you came into them? Before you, I was just surviving, getting through each day, trying to be enough for Zoe, failing half the time. And now? The light turned green and David focused on driving again, leaving his sentence unfinished. They continued in silence until they reached a small Italian restaurant Rose had never been to before. Once they were seated, a candle flickering between them and menus in hand, David tried again. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Talking about feelings. After Lisa died, I shut down that part of myself. It was easier to focus on practical things. Work, Zoe's schedule, paying bills. Rose watched him struggle for words, her own heart beating faster. I understand, she said softly. After the accident, I did the same thing. One foot in front of the other, just trying to survive. But that's not living, David said. And lately with you, I've remembered what it feels like to actually live. The waiter appeared to take their orders, momentarily breaking the intensity of the conversation. When he left, Rose found her courage. David, I need to know something. Why did you stop that night? At the bus stop. Most people would have driven by. David considered the question. Honestly, I don't know. Something just told me I needed to. Maybe because someone did the same for me once. What do you mean? After Lisa died, I was a mess. Couldn't function. Couldn't take care of Zoe properly. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, she stepped in. Cooked meals, watched Zoe, forced me to keep going when all I wanted was to give up. She barely knew us, but she saved us. Rose thought about this. So you were paying it forward? At first, yes, David admitted. But then it became something else. Something I wasn't expecting. Their food arrived, steam rising from plates of pasta. Neither made a move to eat. Rose, I don't want you to move out, David said finally, the words coming in a rush. But I also don't want you to stay because you feel obligated or because it's convenient. I want you to stay because you want to. Because maybe you feel what I'm feeling. Rose's throat tightened with emotion. And what are you feeling? Like we've become a family, David said simply. You, me, and Zoe. Like somehow the universe knew exactly who we needed and dropped her at a bus stop in the rain. Rose blinked back tears. David, it's not that simple. There's so much to consider. Zoe, for one. And what would people think? The social worker already has concerns about our arrangement. I don't care what people think, David said firmly. And as for Zoe, you've seen how she is with you. She adores you. She was lost without a mother. And I was failing at being both parents. I can't replace her mother, Rose said. The enormity of what they were discussing hitting her fully. No one's asking you to, David assured her. But you've brought something back to our home that was missing. Joy, creativity, balance, and I think we've given you something too. Rose couldn't deny it. In this unlikely household, she had found purpose again, connection, a sense of belonging that had been missing since long before her accident. I'm scared, she admitted. What if it doesn't? Work. What if we're confusing gratitude with something else? What if I'm not what Zoe needs? David reached across the table and took her hand. Those are all the right questions, and I don't have perfect answers. All I know is that when I think about you moving out, it feels wrong. Like we'd all be losing something precious. The rest of dinner passed in lighter conversation, both of them needing time to process the weight of what had been said. They talked about Rose's first class, about David's work, about Zoe's upcoming science fair project. As they drove home and Rose found herself thinking of it as home despite everything, a new sense of possibility hung in the air between them. Nothing had been decided, but something had shifted. The unspoken had been spoken, the feelings acknowledged. When they arrived, the house was still empty, with Zoe not due back for another hour. In the quiet living room, Rose found herself looking at the space with new eyes, seeing not just a temporary shelter, but a place where she might belong permanently. I should call Brenda, she said suddenly. Tell her I'll give up the apartment. Are you sure? David asked, not wanting to pressure her. Rose nodded slowly. I'm sure I don't need it. As for the rest, I think we need time. To be certain. To figure out what this is between us. David's relief was palpable. Time we have, he said. And whatever this becomes, I'm grateful for it. For you. The sound of a car door slamming outside signaled Zoe's return. A moment later, she burst through the front door, full of stories about her dinner at Maddie's house. Rose! Dad, Maddie has a pet turtle and it tried to eat my shoe, she announced, dropping her backpack on the floor. Rose and David exchanged an amused look, the tension of their earlier conversation giving way to the simple joy of family life. Did you tell Ms. Miller about your art class today? Zoe asked her father. She's the best teacher ever. I did, David confirmed. And guess what? Rose has decided not to move to the new apartment. She's going to stay with us a while longer. Zoe's face lit up with pure joy. Really? Forever? Rose caught David's eye, a silent communication passing between them. Let's just say, for as long as it feels right, she answered carefully. Zoe seemed to accept this answer, launching into more stories about Maddie's turtle as David made her a snack. Watching them, Rose felt a certainty growing inside her. This was where she belonged. The details could be worked out, the questions answered in time. But the essential truth remained. In the most unexpected way, she had found her way home. Later that night, after Zoe was asleep, Rose sat in the living room with her sketchbook. She had been working on a series of drawings, moments captured from their daily life together. David reading to Zoe at bedtime, Zoe concentrating on homework at the kitchen table, David asleep on the couch after a long shift. Small, ordinary moments that had become precious to her. She was so absorbed in her drawing that she didn't hear David enter the room until he spoke. That's beautiful, he said, looking over her shoulder at the sketch. A drawing of all three of them at the breakfast table, laughing over something Zoe had said. It's us, Rose said simply. Our life. David sat beside her wheelchair. I called Brenda Williams, he said, after you went to bed last night. I told her about our conversation about you staying here. Rose looked up in surprise. What did she say? That she wasn't surprised, David admitted with a small laugh. And that she'd need to do another home visit, make it official. There are procedures for family unification cases, apparently. Is that what we are? Rose asked. Family? David reached for her hand. I think we're becoming one. If that's what you want. Rose looked down at their joined hands, then back at the drawing of the three of them. I never thought I'd have this again, she said softly. After the accident, I thought my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. And now? Now I think maybe I was wrong, Rose said. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you really need. Outside, rain began to fall. A gentle patter against the windows that reminded Rose of that first night. The bus stop, the moment her life had changed. She had been at her lowest then, with no hope, no future that she could see. And then David had appeared with three simple words that had changed everything. Come with me. In the quiet of the living room, with the rain as their witness, Rose made a decision. Whatever challenges lay ahead, questions from social workers, raised eyebrows from neighbors, the complexities of building a new kind of family, they would face them together. She squeezed David's hand, a silent promise. She had come with him that rainy night, a leap of faith when she had nothing left to lose. Now, with everything to gain, she was choosing to stay. 2 months passed in a blur of new routines and adjustments. The spare room that had been Rose's temporary haven was now officially hers, with a few modifications to make it more accessible. David had installed grab bars in the adjoining bathroom and rearranged the furniture to allow her wheelchair more space to maneuver. The autumn afternoon was crisp as Rose finished her last art class of the week at the community center. Her students had made impressive progress over the past months, their artwork displayed proudly on the classroom walls. As she packed up her supplies, a familiar sense of satisfaction warmed her. Teaching again had brought back a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. "Ms. Rose, don't forget about tomorrow," called one of her youngest students, a gap-toothed 7-year-old named Tommy, as his mother led him from the classroom. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Rose assured him with a smile. Tomorrow was the center's fall art show, featuring work from all her classes. It was a milestone she had worked toward since starting the job, a public celebration of what these children had accomplished under her guidance. As the last student left, Rose checked her watch. She had just enough time to get to the elementary school. Today was Zoe's art presentation, and she had promised to be there. David was working and couldn't make it, so Rose would represent their household. Their household. The phrase still felt new and wonderful, despite the occasional complications it brought. There had been questions, of course. The school had been confused about Rose's role in Zoe's life during the first parent-teacher conference. Neighbors had been curious about the woman in the wheelchair, who had seemingly moved in permanently with the widower and his daughter. But for every awkward question, there had been moments of acceptance and support. Mrs. Chen had begun inviting all 3 of them for Sunday dinners. David's colleagues at the hospital had included Rose in their invitation to the staff holiday party. Slowly but surely, they were being recognized as the family they had become. Rose wheeled herself out of the community center and onto the ramp where the accessible van waited. Getting her driver's license modified for hand controls had been another step toward independence. And the van, a gift from David that she had initially resisted, gave her the freedom to come and go as she pleased. As she drove to the elementary school, Rose thought about how much had changed in such a short time. From homeless and hopeless at a rainy bus stop to having a job, a family, a purpose. The transformation still amazed her. The elementary school parking lot was crowded when she arrived. Parents were gathering for the 5th grade art presentation that had been weeks in the making. Zoe had been secretive about her project, wanting it to be a surprise for both Rose and David. The school's accessibility left something to be desired, but Rose had learned to navigate its challenges. A side entrance had a ramp, and she had memorized the route to Zoe's classroom through the less crowded hallways. As she entered the classroom, decorated with colorful artwork and fall-themed projects, Rose felt the familiar mix of pride and mild awkwardness that came with these school events. Parents turned to look at her, some with recognition, others with curiosity. "Rose, you made it." Zoe spotted her from across the room and rushed over, her face alight with excitement. "Come see my project." "It's over here!" Rose followed Zoe to a display area where several canvases were propped on easels. Each student had created a portrait with the theme, "Heroes in My Life." "Close your eyes," Zoe instructed. "I want it to be a total surprise." Rose complied, smiling at Zoe's enthusiasm. She heard the girl positioning her wheelchair in front of the artwork. "Okay, open." Rose opened her eyes and felt emotion immediately tighten her throat. Zoe's canvas showed 3 figures: a man in blue scrubs, a small girl with pigtails, and a woman in a wheelchair. They were holding hands, standing and sitting in front of a simple house with a ramp leading to the door. Above them, in careful lettering, were the words, "My family, the heroes who chose each other." The artwork itself was impressive, showing the techniques Rose had taught her over the months. But it was the title, the sentiment behind it, that brought tears to Rose's eyes. "Do you like it?" Zoe asked anxiously. "I worked really hard on getting your wheelchair right." "It's beautiful," Rose managed to say. "Absolutely beautiful, Zoe." "Ms. Patterson said we should paint the people who inspire us," Zoe explained. "So I painted you and Dad. Because Dad saves people at the hospital, and you didn't give up even when really bad things happened to you." Rose reached out and pulled Zoe into a hug, not caring who was watching or what they might think. This child, who had accepted her so completely, who saw her not as broken but as heroic. So this was the greatest gift she had ever received. "Your painting is wonderful, Zoe," said a voice behind them. Rose turned to see Zoe's teacher, Ms. Patterson, smiling at them. "You must be Rose. Zoe talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope," Rose replied, wiping away a stray tear. "Very good things," the teacher confirmed. "She told us how you've been teaching her art techniques at home. Her progress this year has been remarkable." She lowered her voice slightly. "And not just in art, Zoe seems happier, more confident. Whatever's happening at home, it's making a positive difference." The validation from this objective outsider meant more than Rose had expected. "Thank you for telling me that." As they toured the rest of the classroom, looking at other students' projects, Rose noticed a woman watching them from across the room. She seemed vaguely familiar, but Rose couldn't place her. "That's Aunt Tricia," Zoe whispered, following Rose's gaze. "Mom's sister. She comes to school stuff sometimes." Rose felt a flutter of anxiety. David had mentioned his late wife's family, how they had been close before her death but had gradually drifted apart afterward, finding it too painful to stay connected. She hadn't met any of them yet. Before she could decide whether to introduce herself, the woman was approaching them, her expression a complex mix of curiosity and something Rose couldn't quite identify. "Zoe, sweetheart." She greeted her niece with a hug. "Your artwork is amazing. Your mom would be so proud. Thanks." "Aunt Tricia," Zoe said, then added without hesitation, "This is Rose. She lives with us now and teaches me art. She's in my painting." Tricia turned to Rose, studying her face. "Yes, I've heard about you from Zoe's occasional calls. It's nice to finally meet you." Rose extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you too. Zoe has mentioned you." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unasked questions. Finally, Tricia spoke again. "So you're living with David and Zoe now? Permanently?" The question was direct, but her tone wasn't hostile, merely curious. "Yes," Rose answered simply. No qualifications, no explanations. It was the truth after all. Tricia nodded slowly. "Zoe seems happy. Happier than I've seen her in a long time." "We're all happy," Rose said, feeling protective of the life they had built together. "David and Zoe have given me a second chance at life. I hope I've done the same for them in some way." Something in Tricia's expression softened. "Lisa would have liked you, I think. She always worried what would happen to them if—" She trailed off, glancing at Zoe, who was now showing her painting to a classmate. She just wanted them to be happy. The mention of David's late wife, the woman whose absence had created the space Rose now occupied, was like a stone dropped into still water. Rose had thought about her often, feeling sometimes like an intruder in the life Lisa had left behind. To hear that she might have approved was unexpectedly comforting. "I'm not trying to replace her," Rose said quietly. "I couldn't, even if I wanted to. She'll always be Zoe's mother." "I know," Tricia replied. "But families come in all forms, don't they? And it looks like you three have found yours." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I'd like to keep in touch if that's okay. For Zoe's sake. And maybe we could have coffee sometime. I'd like to get to know the woman who's made such a difference in their lives." Rose accepted the card, touched by the gesture. "I'd like that very much." The event concluded with refreshments in the cafeteria. Rose found herself included in conversations with other parents, introduced by Zoe as "my Rose," with the simple acceptance that children often show toward non-traditional arrangements. By the time they left the school, Rose felt a new sense of belonging, not just within their small family unit, but within the larger community. "Can we go to the park before going home?" Zoe asked as they got into the van. "I want to practice sketching the trees with all the fall colors like you showed me." "Sure," Rose agreed, checking the time. "But not for too long. Your dad will be home for dinner and it's my turn to cook." The local park had a paved pathway that made it accessible for Rose's wheelchair. They found a quiet bench overlooking a small pond where ducks glided across the surface, creating ripples in the golden afternoon light. Zoe sat beside Rose's wheelchair, sketchbook on her lap, tongue between her teeth as she concentrated on capturing the scene before them. Rose watched her, this child who had accepted her so completely, and felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. She had never imagined she could love someone else's child this way, with this fierce protectiveness and pride. "Rose?" Zoe's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything. Are you and Dad going to get married?" The question caught Rose completely off guard. She and David had grown closer over the past months, their relationship deepening beyond friendship into something neither of them had put a label on yet. There had been quiet moments together after Zoe was asleep, conversations that lasted late into the night, and recently, tentative kisses and held hands when they thought Zoe wasn't looking. But marriage? They hadn't discussed it, both perhaps afraid of rushing what was still a new and somewhat fragile connection. "I don't know, Zoe," Rose answered honestly. "That's something your dad and I haven't talked about yet. But you love him, right?" Zoe persisted. "And he loves you. I can tell." Rose smiled at the child's directness. "Yes, I think we do love each other. But love is complicated for grown-ups sometimes." "That's silly," Zoe declared, returning to her drawing. "If you love someone, you should just say so." Out of the mouths of babes, Rose thought. Maybe it really was that simple. "You're right," she told Zoe. "Sometimes adults make things more complicated than they need to be." They stayed at the park until the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass. As they packed up their art supplies, Rose's phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Got off work early. Surprise waiting at home. Don't stop for dinner." Rose smiled at the mysterious message. "Looks like your dad has something planned," she told Zoe as they headed back to the van. The drive home was filled with Zoe's theories about the surprise. A new puppy, unlikely, given their busy schedules. A video game she'd been wanting, possible. Or maybe her favorite takeout food, most probable, Rose thought. When they pulled into the driveway, David's car was there, but the house looked dark. Rose helped Zoe unload her school things from the van, and they made their way up the ramp to the front door. "It's so dark," Zoe commented as Rose unlocked the door. "Maybe Dad's hiding." As they entered the house, soft music was playing, but no lights were on except for what appeared to be dozens of candles casting a warm glow throughout the living room and kitchen. The table was set for 3 with flowers in the center and something delicious smelling coming from the oven. "Dad," Zoe called out. "We're home." "What's the big surprise?" David appeared from the kitchen, dressed not in his usual scrubs or casual clothes, but in a button-down shirt and nice pants. He looked nervous but happy, his eyes finding Rose's immediately. "Welcome home," he said, his voice warm. "I thought we could use a special dinner tonight." "What's the occasion?" Rose asked, noticing that he seemed unusually anxious, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Do we need an occasion to celebrate our family?" David replied, but his eyes held a secret. Dinner was a festive affair. David had prepared Rose's favorite pasta dish, with help from Mrs. Chen, who had apparently been in on whatever was happening. Zoe chattered about her art show and meeting Aunt Tricia, while Rose and David exchanged glances across the table, a current of anticipation running between them. After they finished eating, David cleared his throat. "Zoe, remember what we talked about this morning? Before school?" Zoe's eyes widened and she nodded solemnly. "Can I go get it now?" "Yes, it's in my top dresser drawer." Zoe raced from the room, leaving Rose to look questioningly at David. "What's going on?" David took her hand across the table. "I had a lot of time to think during my shift today, about life and how unpredictable it is, how one moment can change everything, sometimes for the worse, but sometimes," he squeezed her hand, "sometimes for the better." Before he could continue, Zoe returned, holding a small velvet box. Rose's heart began to race as she realized what might be happening. "Rose," David said, taking the box from Zoe. "When I stopped at that bus stop in the rain, I had no idea I was about to meet the person who would help make our house a home again. I had no idea that the woman sitting there in the rain would become so important to both of us." He glanced at Zoe, who was watching with barely contained excitement. David opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "I know it hasn't been very long, and maybe this is crazy, but sometimes when something is right, you just know it. And this, us, our family, feels right." He moved from his chair to kneel beside Rose's wheelchair. "I'm not asking you to replace anyone or to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to continue being exactly who you are, the woman we've grown to love. The woman who completed our family when we didn't even know we were incomplete." Tears filled Rose's eyes as David took her hand. "Rose Miller, will you marry me? Will you make official what we already know in our hearts? That we're a family?" For a moment, Rose couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. She looked from David to Zoe, who was practically bouncing with anticipation. Say yes, Zoe whispered loudly.
Say yes, Rose.
Rose laughed through her tears. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, of course I will. David slipped the ring onto her finger and Zoe threw herself into a group hug that nearly toppled Rose's wheelchair. The three of them held each other, laughing and crying at the same time. Later that evening, after Zoe had finally gone to bed, still too excited to sleep, Rose and David sat in the living room, the candles still burning low. You planned this with Zoe? Rose asked, still admiring the ring on her finger. David nodded. She helped pick out the ring, said it had to be sparkly but not too fancy because you're elegant but practical. He smiled at the memory. She also said we were being silly taking so long to figure out we should get married. She asked me at the park today if we were going to get married, Rose admitted. I told her we hadn't talked about it yet. And what did our wise daughter say to that? Our daughter. The words sent a warm glow through Rose's heart. She said if we love each other, we should just say so, that adults make things too complicated. David laughed. She's right. I've been thinking about asking you for weeks, trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words. He took her hand, running his thumb over the ring. But in the end, it's simple. I love you. Zoe loves you. We want you to be part of our family forever. I already am, Rose said softly. But I love that you asked anyway. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the reality of their engagement settling around them like a warm blanket. There will be challenges, Rose said finally, ever practical. People may not understand how quickly this happened, and I still have limitations because of my disability. We'll face whatever comes together, David replied, just like we have been, one day at a time. Rose thought about how far they had come, from that rainy night at the bus stop to this moment of commitment and love. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined when she sat in that wheelchair, soaked and hopeless with nowhere to go. Come with me, David had said that night, 3 simple words that had changed everything. I'm glad I came with you, Rose whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. It's the best decision I ever made. 6 months later, on a bright spring day, the backyard of their small house was transformed with flowers and white chairs arranged in neat rows. An aisle had been created wide enough for Rose's wheelchair, leading to an arch where David waited with the minister. Guests filled the chairs, colleagues from the hospital, students and parents from Rose's art classes, neighbors who had become friends, and even a few of Lisa's family members, including Aunt Tricia, who had become a regular visitor and supporter of their unconventional family. From inside the house, Rose looked out at the gathering, her heart full. She wore a simple ivory dress, her hair adorned with small flowers that matched her bouquet. Beside her, Zoe practically vibrated with excitement in her role as both flower girl and ring bearer. Ready? Mrs. Chen asked, adjusting Rose's bouquet on her lap. Rose nodded, suddenly too emotional for words. This day, this life was more than she had ever dared to dream of during those dark days after her accident. The music started, and Zoe began her procession down the aisle, scattering rose petals with one hand and carefully holding the ring pillow with the other. The guests smiled and murmured at the sight of the beaming child, so clearly happy about the union about to take place. Then it was Rose's turn. She had insisted on navigating her own wheelchair for this moment, wanting to come to David under her own power, symbolizing the strength and independence she had reclaimed. As she began down the aisle, she saw David's face, watched his eyes fill with tears as he saw her, and felt her own vision blur with emotion. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, promises that acknowledged their unique journey and the unexpected gift they had found in each other. I promise to see your challenges not as limitations, but as opportunities for growth and adaptation, David vowed. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your independence while offering my hand when needed. And I promise to never take for granted the miracle that brought you to our door that rainy night. Rose's voice trembled as she made her own promises. I vow to bring creativity, joy, and perseverance to our family each day. I promise to honor the past while building our future. And I promise to remember always that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about the people who choose each other, again and again, through all of life's storms and sunshine. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zoe couldn't contain herself and rushed forward to join their embrace. turning the traditional first kiss into a family hug that had the guests laughing and wiping away tears. At the reception in their backyard, as twilight fell and string lights twinkled overhead, Rose found a moment of quiet reflection. She watched as David danced with Zoe standing on his feet, both of them laughing. She saw their friends and family mingling, celebrating not just a marriage but the creation of a family that had found each other against all odds. Her former social worker, Brenda, approached with a glass of champagne. "Congratulations," she said, genuine happiness in her voice. "I don't often get to see such perfect endings to my cases." "Not an ending," Rose corrected gently. "Just another beginning." Brenda nodded in understanding. "You know, that night at the bus stop could have gone so differently. If David hadn't stopped, if you hadn't trusted him enough to say yes, why I know," Rose said. "Sometimes the biggest moments in our lives hinge on the smallest decisions." As if sensing they were talking about him, David looked over and smiled, excusing himself from the dance to join them. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, placing a hand on Rose's shoulder. "Perfect," Rose assured him. "Just reflecting on how we got here." David leaned down to kiss the top of her head. "Best detour I ever took," he said. "Stopping at that bus stop changed everything." Zoe bounded up to them, her flower girl dress slightly rumpled from dancing. "Rose, can we dance now? Dad showed me how we can do it with your wheelchair." Rose laughed, touched by the child's enthusiasm and thoughtfulness. "I'd love to dance with you, Zoe." As David pushed her wheelchair to the center of the makeshift dance floor, with Zoe holding her hands and twirling beside her, Rose felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This family, her family, had been found in the most unexpected place at the lowest point in her life. 3 words had changed everything that rainy night. 3 simple words that had opened the door to a new life, a new beginning. "Come with me." And she had, and she would every day for the rest of their lives together.